Good evening. Welcome to the Future of Education debate. My name is Anna Hofman, and I will be your today's discussion moderator. The debate opens Eduhack 2021 International Hackathon for the Future of Education, a project organized by the University of Warsaw Incubator in cooperation with 6 other European universities. From Germany, University of Bonn, we have 3 universities from Czech Republic, Charles University, Masaryk University, and Palacký University, Olomouc. From Hungary, Budapest Metropolitan University, and from Poland, Medical University of Warsaw. Additionally, we joined by Pfizer and 8 Food as sponsors, and TGHT and Digital Economy Laboratory of University of Warsaw as content partners. We were also taken under the media patronage of Agencja ISB News, Płyń pod prąd, Forum Akademickie, and Radio Campus. What should you know about Eduhack 2021? That for the next 3 days, students from all over the European Union will compete to create the best solution for the challenge the organizers prepared for them, building commitment at the university classes conducted online and monitoring it. What is different about this hackathon is that contrary to most hackathons, Eduhack welcomes not only IT specialists and programmers, but also enthusiasts of learning, innovation, and education. Coming back to today's meeting, March of last year changed the realities of almost every aspect of our lives, education included. Quickly, the word online has become one of the most frequently used. Online, remote, distant education was implemented in almost every country, not only those in Europe. Today, after almost a year, we have learned a lot, got used to doing many things differently. We gained the experience which allows us to improve online education. Today, to discuss the challenges we have faced and shed a light on the opportunities distant learning has given us for the future, I'm joined by 4 experts on the topic. Please welcome István Vilmos, vice-rector for international relations at Budapest Metropolitan University. Welcome. Please welcome Florian Radvan, professor of Didactics of German language and literature at the University of Bonn. Welcome. Please welcome Joanna Mazur, analyst in Digital Economy Laboratory of University of Warsaw. Welcome, Joanna. And we hope to soon be joined by Maciej Ciemny, Scientific Affairs Director at Predict Systems. I hope Maciej will join us in a few quick minutes. Welcome all. So before we proceed and discuss the topic from different perspectives with our experts, Joanna will share the results of a research conducted on distant learning. The report Remote Learning, Taming the Unknown Impact of COVID-19 on Higher Education was prepared by the University of Warsaw Incubator and Digital Economy Lab at University of Warsaw. Joanna, as you were the main creator of the report, what can you tell us about the situation we have faced? We're leaving you here. We'll be back in a second, but we're very much listening to your presentation and hoping to know more about the situation of remote learning.
I'm just trying to put on the presentation. Okay, so are the slides visible? Okay, so thank you for this introduction. I would like to present the analysis titled, as you mentioned, Remote Learning, Taming the Unknown. And the title, I think, tells a lot about the content, actually. And firstly, I would like to start with some assumptions that we had when we started to prepare this report. Firstly, we wanted to focus strictly on the COVID-19 and the pandemic that is going on and how it impacted both teaching and studying and what is special about this shift which took place. So it actually determined the sources that we used. What we tried to do was to combine the results of various studies performed on this topic in various European countries And as you may suspect, the problem is that even though the pandemic lasts for more or less a year now, a year is not that much when we're talking about research. So we still don't know a lot, and the results that
Hi, Joanna. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think we cannot see the presentation. Please try to share it again, and we'll come back. Yes, that was a very good preview for a second. I'm very sorry for the technical difficulties. We'll be back with you all with the presentation going just in a second. I hope you can all see it now. Yes, I can see it now. I hope our viewers can see it as well. And if you make it full screen, we can proceed.
Now, does it work?
Let's go with what we have on right now. I still cannot see it full screen, but I hope everyone can.
Screen, I am in the full screen mode, so I hope it works.
Let's proceed then. I hope everybody can see your presentation because I believe it's very valuable. Oh, we have the information in the chat that you can see it before. You can see it, and the participants could have seen it before. So let's proceed. Sorry for the interruption. Joanna's report.
Okay, so back to the sources and the problems connected to them. So as I mentioned, what we tried to do was to combine the results of various studies performed at various universities all over Europe. But the problem is that even though the pandemic lasts almost a year now, it's still not that much time when it comes to research. So we still don't know everything, and probably we'll still have to wait for more specific information. However, what the things that we wanted to focus on and that I will try to somehow mention in the presentation were firstly the challenges that appeared, secondly some thoughts on the perspective of the students, thirdly some thoughts on the perspective of the teachers, and how does it all compare to recommendations that are created in terms of how actually online education and distance learning should look like. So I would like to start talking about the challenges with a tweet, as I believe that what I said about how research works and that it takes time also makes it somehow more easy for other firms to quickly capture the changes which are going on. So this is the tweet, and it says, "My professor is 74 and he isn't confident using Zoom, so he's pre-recorded the rest of our classes. Today I watched the first one. He has a Pinocchio doll in the front row because he isn't comfortable teaching to an empty room. I'm social distancing for this man and this man only." And I think many of us can relate to this need of having like some kind of creature, if not a human being, and somebody around, the presence of somebody to actually don't feel that you're talking to a black screen. And this tweet somehow shows the unprecedented character of the shift that we are experiencing now. So,
hi, Joanna. Sorry again for the interruption. It seems like we cannot see you switching, moving through the slides. Could you please stop share and try to share it from? Oh, okay. I can see a change. Can you switch from different slides now? Move to another one. Okay, I can see the slides moving now. You're at the 5th slide, is that correct? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see the presentation now. So could you please go back to the slide with the tweet you've been talking about now, so we can all see it? Perfect. Thank you so much. Let's proceed.
Yeah, I will just give you 2 seconds to enjoy it. And back to the unprecedented kind of shift that we're experiencing. So, as I mentioned, it's hard to actually compare what we've been going through for the last year with anything before, because even though plenty of higher education institutions used to have some courses in online format, it was rarely the case that whole studies were actually conducted online. So this is something what the pandemic changed. And I think what it made very visible is the variety of needs that actually differ between various disciplines and various types of classes, and the problems which rise due to the online format are different when we are talking about lecture for few hundred students and when we are talking about some kind of practical classes for a small group. And a factor which I would like to also mention concerning these challenges is that it is quite difficult to compare the impact that the outside world has now on the academia to anything in what we've been previously experiencing. So what I mean by that is that both the health crisis, the mental health crisis, the economic crisis has strong influence both of students and on teachers, and it somehow determines their abilities and the quality of the work we've been performing for last months. And all these difficulties make it quite understandable that especially the beginnings of online teaching were quite difficult. On the slide, you see the results of a survey performed on more than 3,000 Polish students in the beginnings of the pandemic in spring last year, where almost 70% of students who participated in the survey claimed that their classes were actually performed by email. Of course, the situation developed within last months, and now it's rather an exception, not a rule, that classes are taught by email. However, I think that these data show us how much has changed and how many improvements we managed to perform within last months. So now I would like to say something about the perspective of the students and what seems to be quite common for many of them. Firstly, what might be surprising is a strong preference for synchronous courses. So these courses which take place in real time in the presence of teacher. So they somehow try to resemble the traditional classes. It is surprising because before the pandemic, actually the flexibility of online studying was mentioned quite often as its huge advantage, the ability to attend classes from universities all over the world. However, now it seems that due to the situation that we've been experiencing, actually the preference is for these synchronous types of classes. The second thing which seems to be quite common for the students' perspective is the feeling that the workload and the amount of work that students have to perform increased because of the shift to online learning. And on the slide, you see the results from the survey performed at the University of Bonn. And however, this type of results were also achieved at other surveys, which results you can find in the publication. And this problem with the workload, with how time consuming actually online studying and online teaching are confirmed by the perspective of teachers. So the data that we found from various higher education institutions indicate that also teachers have this strong impression that their workload increased due to the shift to online teaching. Moreover, what seems to be quite common for teachers is this feeling that the technological difficulties, as the ones we've been experiencing for past 10 minutes, actually make it quite difficult to perform their didactical obligations. So often the quality of the internet connection, the quality of the equipment that teachers possess and are able to use somehow determines their ability to teach, which is quite impossible to compare with the traditional format when you just had to enter the class and teach. And all these impressions about online studying and online teaching should be confronted with the recommendations which are created for such format of education. So firstly, it is recommended to provide additional materials for students. So the theory says that if a teacher provides students with quizzes and other additional tasks, students perform better in online courses. However, as we may suspect, it is quite time-consuming to prepare such materials. So we see this clash between the theory, what is recommended, and the practice, what is actually achievable. Secondly, the problem is that it is recommended to lower the expectations because of everything that's been going on. However, there is this curriculum which has to be covered, and the program which with the material that students learn. Therefore, it's difficult to lower your expectations when you are obliged to actually cover the material exactly the same as before. Thirdly, it is recommended to provide students with more individualized contact and provide them with feedback. However, again, we're back with this question of time. So when teachers declare that it's more time consuming to teach online, it is quite difficult to actually get involved in preparing more additional ways of providing students with feedback and with individualized messages. And the problem is that actually these interactions, these interpersonal interactions, not only have impact on students' grades, as you can see on the slide, but they also have impact on students' satisfaction with the classes they take. So the more interpersonal interactions are present in the course that we are taking, technically we are more satisfied with such classes. And the types of practices which are recommended for such interpersonal interactions include assignments that ask students to express what they have learned and what they still need to learn, frequent quizzes or other assessments, personal messages to students about how they are doing in the course, and work on group projects separately from the course meetings. And again, I believe that the conclusion which we can, or rather the thought which we can have when we're looking at these practices which are recommended, is a problem of time. So again, we see this clash between what we should imply in the online courses and this feeling that share both students and teachers that online format is more time consuming. So I think we should confront these recommendations and these feelings that students and teachers have about online teaching with the question what new technologies and trends in higher education which develop due to these technological changes can bring. So how we can use new technologies to provide some solutions to these problems which I mentioned. Because what seems to be the promise of new technologies is actually something what seems to be a cure for these problems that we have. So the promise is that we can develop data-driven solutions for education, that we can develop personalized methods which will allow students to have more individualized course of studies, and also more from the perspective of teachers, that new technologies can provide them with tools which will allow them to automate repetitive tasks. And I think that when we compare these promises of new technologies with this feeling that online studies and online teaching is more time consuming, we can see that there is a space to develop solutions which would allow actually us to save time. So we need technological solutions which would allow teachers, for example, to prepare quizzes or to make these tasks which allow students to assess their progress in very easy manner, in very time efficient manner, so that we would have more time for this interpersonal contact, which seems so vital, according to research, for the effectiveness of online education. And the tweet that I would like to end with, you see on the slide, I think confirms somehow this need of actually seeing another person and having this interpersonal connection during the studies and during the classes. And this would be all. Thank you. And I hope we'll discuss not only these matters, but also other questions and issues connected to online education during the debate.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for your valuable insight. The report was great. Now I would like for all of us to come back to the discussion, because I believe it would be very valuable to give you all to talk about the experience we had, to add maybe some examples. So what I would like for us to begin with is actually going back almost a year ago to the day when you had to make the decision to switch to remote learning. And I would like to begin with you, István. How was the transition at your university from the traditional to remote learning? How did it happen at Budapest Metropolitan University? I think you're muted, István.
Thank you. So it was a really adventurous period, because some of the universities chose to have an extraordinary break to prepare colleagues, to prepare technology, the Wi-Fi, the IT, to provide the lecturers laptop, or many other technical and professional difficulties occurred. My university became very inspired by this challenge, and we decided that we will manage it in 24 hours. So it meant that our forerunner or early adopter colleagues who had prior experience in the field of online teaching provided a lot of tutorials for the colleagues, used their YouTube channels. So not only the teachers of our university could get benefit from these tutorials, but many others already. One of them I checked yesterday. There has been 10,000 visitors looking at how to launch the first Zoom classes. And I wouldn't say that everybody could cope with the situation with the same speed, but everybody was taking the challenge and trying to move on and solving step-by-step problems. And to be fair, the students were also very adaptive, not only to the technical changes, but also to the regular difficulties that they had to face together with the teachers. But I think it was a very fast, unprecedented learning process.
Okay, so it was very well organized at your university, from what I can hear. You approached it with the digital mindset from the beginning, and already provided classes for teachers, which we'll definitely touch on in a minute. Florian, what was your experience and the experience at the University of Bonn?
Well, I can definitely say we didn't manage within 24 hours, but we gave ourselves a 2-week break. What happened was that the rectorate bought a campus-wide Zoom license straight in the beginning and decided to push back classes. Well, that happened statewide, actually, in our state here in North Rhine-Westphalia for 2 weeks. So lectures and seminars started late in a way. So we had 2 weeks time to prepare everything due to the reason that we've got 7 faculties. It's a university of about 40,000 students. So many things had to be organized. The task force was set in by the rectorate with delegates from all the 7 faculties. And then I was quite surprised, and I'm still quite surprised with hindsight, that the process worked quite well. There were colleagues then later on from end of March, beginning of April, and April still conducting classes via email, but the majority was on Zoom, was synchronous, And we did get support, of course. Could have been more in the beginning, but I guess that increased with rapid speed. For example, by our Center of Digital Humanities, and they provided us with offers of online training, how to set up video tutorials, how to use various options on Zoom, etc. So it took a bit longer maybe than what was just said, but it then happened with increasing speed.
If I remember correctly, you specialize in German didactics.
That's true.
Okay, so my question now would be, were the classes for you, teachers, professors, helpful? And what was your experience from switching from the traditional way of teaching and to switching to the kind of remote online version as a German didactics professor? How did it feel for you?
Well, to be honest, I was a bit scared in the beginning because I wasn't really into teaching digitally, and I still am very fond of traditional ways of teaching. But I think we've learned a lot by using computers, using tools, using programs, using platforms in a different manner. And I'm quite happy teaching online now because we've changed our entire system. How long is a lecture? What happens within a lecture, for example? How can seminars be structured in different ways? So I'm quite content now, I have to say, and it was a point of innovation for us. The problems were more in legal constructs, and I mean, this is always.
Okay, I believe we lost Florian for a second. I hope he will be back with us, finishing to answer his question. So I will use this time to ask you, István, what was your Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Florian, you're back with us.
I'm sorry, I didn't know. I don't know what happened. It just went black, the screen, but now I appear to.
I'm glad you're back with us. Please continue.
Well, what I was just about to say, of course, there's also some sort of a legal framework to it, how to conduct examinations online, for example, which formats to choose. Can you just transfer to the digital equivalents when it comes to oral examinations, to written examinations? All that had to be changed. And, you know, being from Germany and partly bureaucratic person, all these things need to be thought about.
Okay, thank you for that. I was just about to ask István, what was your experience in that matter? How did you personally feel with the change?
I was scared as well. So the definite surprise of the new uncertainty that occurred from one minute to another, it resulted in a regular discovery process. So for the first Zoom class, was simply an experiment, and it was a question where the student arrived whether I'm visible or not. So there were so many technical questions that we had to get used to work with. And I remember when I opened the first breakout rooms, I simply didn't know what will happen to my students. Whether I can have them back again. And I had to learn that letting them working in breakout rooms, being hidden from my direct supervision, gives them energy. And when they come back to the plenary setting, they are in a better mood, and they have done great things. And this is something that a boundary crossing, and for many teachers it's not an easy step to get through these difficulties and trying new things, and therefore those kind of situations where teachers work in pairs, when one can or another solution, when teachers ask one of the students to be an assistant during the class, it improves very much the confidence that if anything happens, I can ask how to solve that problem. Because simply if we look at this meeting, there are so natural, organic, technical issues that we shouldn't dedicate too much attention on remembering for days that, oh my God, I was frozen, or I lost my voice, or my picture was blurred. It's simply part of the game. It never happened in an ordinary classroom that the teacher disappeared. Probably you remember in the first weeks there were great funny videos demonstrating the differences between the classical or traditional classroom and in a Zoom classroom. There are so many things that can be considered as funny, but there are serious, sometimes catastrophic moments as well.
Okay, thank you. That was very interesting. We have a question I would like for you to answer. Septo asked, is there any over-uni standards? By that I mean, does the officials require you to use any programs, or everyone can use any programs they want to for online lectures? I believe this is a question directed at Florian, because you touched on the topic of the requirements for online learning. We talked a bit about using Zoom and how to deal with the online, but what about the rules concerning it?
Well, there was a debate in Bonn and nationwide in Germany about the safety standards of Zoom, particularly if we can use it for personal information, can we use it for exams, etc. And they found a solution at Bonn University anyway, that we log in via a shibboleth, I think this is called technically, so via our online university IDs. So it's then apparently a higher security standard. But we also have a university platform, it's called eCampus, and all the data is only stored and loaded at Bonn University. So that's also possible to use it, And strictly speaking, we're not free to use anything, but there are a variety of platforms, also something called BBB, Big Blue Button, which is, as far as I know, a German invention.
Okay, so this is actually the way I would like for us to follow. So you said you've been using Zoom. There's the Big Blue Button platform. I know we've used at my university, we've used Meet for a second. What other technological solution have been used? István, Joanna, Maciej, I would actually love all of you to participate. István, could you tell us what?
We provided for our teachers the option to choose between Zoom and Teams, which part of the Microsoft services, and I think step by step everybody tried both, or most of our colleagues tried both. Now we see the competition between the service providers with the new service of Teams providing also the breakout room service, which is an essential part of the opportunities. But the experimentation is not about finding new platforms, video platforms, but also to combine things. So what we found very powerful, if we asked our students to work on shared Word editors, or in sheets, Excel sheets, or the new miracle for group work is Miro and Mural, and these kind of platforms are opening new chapters in online education. And it is very important because that's my opinion, that if a traditional class is boring, then simply providing that boring class online, it's 10 times more boring. So therefore, in an online environment, we cannot go forward with the traditional approaches. So it's a very strong challenge to start new things, which is very difficult. So when I prepared my first class with Miro, it was about 4 times more time to arrange things than delivering that particular class. And it will improve. So, but let me reflect to a question. Whether students received any guidance. And it's a very good question, because teachers think that students are automatically familiar with every services, every platforms, every softwares, and more or less it's true. That's strange that the teachers needed much more collaborative learning opportunities, exchange of good practices, new solutions. The students, I guess, they also shared the experience, and they assisted each other if they confronted any difficulties.
Thank you. This is very interesting, but I've seen Maciej nodding when you mention connecting different technical solutions, which you mentioned is important to make the classes more interesting, and how to make the classes more interesting. Maciej, could you maybe tell us a bit more about why you nodded, actually, and about this connection between different platforms?
Okay, so to be honest, I nodded twice. I know that at first time when you said that providing online class in the same form, the same version, making just it's a Skype classroom or Meet's classroom, or well, online classroom the same way, it makes 10 times more boring, the experience. I totally agree with that. And what actually is interesting is that that's not surprising. COVID caught education by surprise in like great extent. So we, and probably all the universities, used what they had at that point ready or not very ready for education. So that's why I think we've kind of stuck in video conferencing with each other during education, and that's probably not the best idea. And I'm really happy to hear and see that some of the classes are moving to Miro and some collaborative experiences for the students. But what really interests me is that we haven't probably properly rethought the process of education in this new situation. I mean, we are still digitalizing the experience the students had before without really, it's probably because of lack of time mostly, rethinking and redesigning the education process that we have. And as you said and mentioned, combining these various tools like Miro or shared documents, it actually opens new ways of presenting knowledge and new ways of learning. And that's, well, something we could possibly learn from the students themselves in some extent, because they use shared documents, they use those platforms, they use social media to connect with each other while educating or while learning. And that's a really, really interesting point at which the universities should probably try to reach out to students to see what they prefer for learning. I don't know what's your opinion on that.
István, Florian, would you like to comment here about maybe your experience with? Oh, Joanna, you would like to comment?
Yeah, I would like to comment, and I think it's actually in the spirit of something that Florian already mentioned. So the problem is not only in the management process and in the time, but also in regulation. And when you have rules which determine the way that you have to teach, actually you can't just skip to the providing students with space for their collaboration. You just have to stick to the rules. So I guess it would take some time for them to change. This is one thing. And the other thing about rules is that also depending on the faculty, at least at our university, they also determine the tools that you can use. So sometimes, at least at my faculty, it is like this, that the small classes and the classes for big groups, there is a difference in the programs which you're using. So I can't use Zoom, for example, for my classes, because these are small groups which I have to teach with Meets. And of course, it comes with all the disadvantages that lack of, for example, the possibility to divide students in groups Meets bring. So yeah, I wanted to mention this regulatory dimension, which it has quite strong influence on what we can and what we cannot do. But of course, it doesn't change the fact that in terms of using additional tools, there is still plenty of possibilities, no matter which platforms we're using. So they're independent on the video conferencing tool, which we are obliged to use.
I think nodding will be my cue to call out different people. So Florian, you've been nodding. Could you please tell us
I was nodding,
why?
but probably just on a keyword that's been mentioned twice now, faculties. There's one problem we haven't been able to solve in the entire year now, and I'd be very interested to find out if someone else's solutions. This is quite a difference if you're talking about teaching, for example, German language and literatures in the frame of teacher education, or being in an experimental biology or chemistry class. And there comes the problem we haven't been able to solve, how to cater for all the laboratory-based work that by definition needs to be in presence with the chemicals, etc., or the objects. How to substitute here. And this is one still of the unsolved questions for us. Now the lockdown, there's talk of it being extended in Germany. We've got rules through end of January, but Chancellor just said today or alluded to the fact it might be prolonged. So what to do, not only with exams that normally need to be in presence, but also these laboratory-based issues. That was my cue for faculty, sorry.
Oh, I think it's a very important question, a very important matter, and I think we had a question about it, which I'm not going to read now, but I believe one of the students asked about the differences between the faculties, and I think this is also very important to mention, because I think when we talk about remote education, we kind of all assume we should talk about lectures, and as you said, collaborative work on Miro, Mural, Kahoot, Class Dojo, whichever platform you decide to choose. But also, as you said, there is those issues which we still don't have solutions for. Like there are faculties like, let's take medicine. How do you teach to heal people without the other people present? István, do you? Yeah, please.
I was wondering when you mentioned the gradual learning challenges, and going back to the question whether students received any help or instruction how to work in this environment, and it occurs to me that for students there was some behavioral challenge, because it was as an unusual situation watching a computer screen and looking ourselves as well. So it's a not really comfortable situation. Therefore, students at the first in the first period hide themselves. So they muted the camera, and it was the presentation of Joanna that it's so difficult to teach a large classroom when everybody is invisible. Therefore, we had to introduce the soft demand that please unmute yourself, because it's so much more inspiring, so much more friendly if we can look at each other. But for teachers, it's again a challenge, because if I ask my students to be visible, then I have to give meaning to that presence. So I have to ask questions. I have to encourage them to give feedbacks using the possible tools of the platform, with the raising hands on, or giving the likes, like signals, and these kind of things can give meaning to the joint appearance in the classroom. And there were many other things. For example, preparing students for the preparation of the class, how they should arrange the lighting, how they can avoid this kind of or this kind of presence. So there are so many tricky challenges that we have to learn. Not only the teachers, but these kind of things are the same difficult for students as well. And I think from pedagogical point of view, that's a real success if a teacher can achieve a full presence with faces, with mimics that provide feedback of enthusiasm and inspiration. And it's good for everybody. It's good for the class and good for the teacher.
Thank you. I didn't see much nodding, so I don't know which one of you asked to speak. But I believe this is something very important that Joanna already mentioned during the report about the relationship between the professor, the teacher, and the students, and how to create it, how to make it the best one we can have. I believe all of you have the experience of teaching at the university and teaching during the pandemics. So I'm going to ask, what are your tricks of engaging the online classroom? Maciej, maybe you would like to tell us something?
Okay, so I will share a story. As I'm teaching computer classes, I mean programming skills and like software developing skills. And actually, well, you would expect that it's easy to move this kind of class to online, because even if it's in the classroom, I actually have my screen presented via on a big screen. You can see my own screen, and that's what I do during the classes when it's in the classroom. As it turned out, like digitalizing this experience is far more complicated than I expect, because the relation inside the classroom is far more personal than just presenting the screen. And what turned out to be useful is actually making the classes smaller. I mean, working individually with people to greater extent. But actually, it was fortunate that I could do so. Probably in most of the cases, in big lectures for hundreds of students, it's not really possible to split them into small groups and provide them this kind of personal attendance, and to like give a silver lining to this educational issue. Thanks to this moving to online, we could also teach the students using real tools that they should use at work. I mean, in most of the cases, the developers use online tools. They share their code. They collaborate online. That's something we didn't really do at the university, but this time we had to. So they got those skills for free, let's say, and that was the good part. But it was really complicated, I guess, for me, for the students, and for all involved in the process.
Thank you. I believed you also touched on a topic one of our participants, one of the people listening to our debate mentioned. Septo again said that in his opinion, it is difficult to have an eye on those 20 people. That as here we have only 5, I can or cannot sometimes see you nodding. But as you said, it may be valuable to make the classes smaller. Florian, what is your experience?
Before we move on, I think that actually it's a magnifying glass of a real problem that we had before. I'm not really sure. I mean, maybe more experienced teachers managed to see the reactions of 20 people in the classroom, but I couldn't do so. I mean, I just noticed that I'm having this problem when it was online, but it turned out that the same problem was before. I just didn't notice it.
Okay, this is very important. As a former student, I wouldn't really think about it. Florian, what is your input here? Do you feel like it is more or less difficult, or maybe it is the same to notice all the students and build a relationship with them? Would also maybe making class more, you think, be useful?
Well, I think it's not more or less difficult. It's difficult in a different fashion. But I would like to come back to a point first that you raised earlier, the maybe some tricks or good points. This is possibly not terribly innovative, but what happened in one of my lectures was that we used Zoom to that end, that we invited outside experts from nearly all over Europe to come in for 20-minute expert talks, just question and answers, etc. This was a class on inclusion in the German language classroom, and so we invited not only inclusion teachers but also an expert from a university in southern Germany who specializes in research on computer games and inclusion, etc., etc. So nearly every other lecture was not conducted just by me and a colleague, but by experts. So we had a lot more of methodological variation in it. And that proved to be quite successful to easily invite without them having to travel to Bonn, for example, easily switchable within various directions. There was someone telling us about inclusion in Austria and in Spain, for example. So we want to make more use of that, inviting outside expertise in a way.
So if I understand correctly, actually the online setting gave you an opportunity to kind of build the engagement and maybe tell students more in a completely different way to include different people.
Yeah, exactly. There are quite a handful of practical problems when you invite people to give guest lectures. They've got to come, you've got to book the hotel, pay the price, etc., etc. So it's quite costly to have someone from, say, England or Spain in Germany. And it takes a lot of time and effort. And now everybody has zoomed in, as it were, technologically. It's quite comfortable and also for shorter talks. Yeah, normally a guest lecture in our case, traditional university, would have been some 90 minutes or so, the entire lecture. So it's only a 15 or 20 minute break we have from the normal proceeding. It's not a break thematically, it's just a break in someone different coming in and providing input.
Okay, thank you. I would still like to follow the line of your tricks. István, do you have any tricks of building commitment?
Yeah, it's just reflecting to one of the questions that shouldn't we ask regular or frequent feedback from students, how they feel, how the exercises that we designed meet the expectations. I think this is essential. So simply the physiological challenge, sitting hours in front of the computer, needs the opportunity to alarm or indicate or signal that I need water, I need walking, I need something to eat. And this is not usual in a classical or traditional class, but in online environment, the speed of time, the speed of exhaust is totally different. We can recognize it when after hours of teaching or learning in front of the computer and we stand up after the class, we can recognize that our legs are totally collapsed or in strange state. So we need to take care of our body, our organ. We take care of our mental health. Therefore, feedback is very, very important, and also regular breaks. For example, if somebody wants to take part in an online learning day, we found also with adults that we need after 90 minutes half an hour or 1 hour break. We cannot go on. And from pedagogical point of view, it is also important to vary the different kind of tasks that we assign to our students. So why not to let them read a book or watch something on the TV and not on the computer? That's something that makes things more colorful. So thank you for the question of feedbacks. I think it's crucial. The other thing is that sometimes very simple opportunities are not exploited enough. For example, there is a chat wall. We can allow our participants to write something, but we can also ask them. So for example, now I would like to ask our student participants to write the name of the home country into the chat box. Please do it and show us the colorful background of our participants.
I'm very curious about the responses we will get and the engagement of students today.
I hope they are here.
I can see 54 of them. I hope they will answer us, as I believe we're doing kind of a trial of how it could go in a class. Oh, we have answers coming. So there's Jakub from Poland, Jitka, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, from Czech Republic. We have Sarka from Czech Republic, Tatev from Germany. And then there are people coming from Poland, Czech, Georgia, Poland again. Okay, we're getting answers mostly from Poland now.
Yes.
Yep. Oh, we can see them now on the screen. Vietnam and Thailand. Poland, I guess bonjour is from France. Okay, István, what would you do in a class?
Yes, so these kind of opportunities, or in Zoom, the poll option, that is very easy. So during the class, you can ask whether a certain content was clear or understandable enough. So therefore, it is so easy to make interactions in big classes as well. Maciej mentioned the difficulty of managing a large classroom with 100 or 150 students. But for example, defining breakout rooms for 3 or 4 students, it's much easier in an online environment than in an auditorium where the seats are fixed and you cannot combine, you cannot reorganize the room. So I think there are many things that can operate or can be functional in the online environment, but with so much wish to combine the online environment with face-to-face classes. And maybe one thing that still can play a role, that the alternatives that cannot risk the health of the students, walking together in the city, or organizing excursion, or keeping distance and everything according to the rules, but to cut the monotony of the online teaching and learning environment. I think that's also something that we have to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you. That was very diverse, and you touched on a lot of topics. But I feel like you also started talking about the advantages of online learning, that we have learned a lot and we can take a lot of good things from what we've experienced. Joanna, can you maybe, according to our reports, name a few of those things that are actually very well done thanks to remote learning?
Yeah, I think we somehow already mentioned a couple of them, like the invitation of guests coming from abroad, which is much easier. However, I agree with what István just said about the combining the real world with the digital one. I think this would be the best solution. So the options which, for example, we use the possibilities offered by online environment, but also we are able to participate, in real life activities or real world activities, maybe. So yeah, I think what could be, for example, good would be if we, because in the chat there was also this question about why online teaching is so much more time consuming, and I think one of the reasons is the need to prepare all your materials which you used to write on the board in the classroom, or which you used to have in the traditional format. You have to change them all to the online format, or figure out the way to actually produce them during classes, which would be also engaging for students. So there is a lot of conceptual work in terms of arranging whole classes, which was already mentioned also. And there is all of this work with the practical things which one needs to prepare. And I think the advantage in future would be that we'll have all this prepared already. So we'll be able to use all these things which we spend so much time on preparing, to provide students later with all these materials, with the online courses, which would be already prepared with the recordings and everything. So future thinking.
So do I understand correctly that this, even though it's very time consuming now, it can pay off in the future? Because we used to have everything written down, as you said, probably on paper. And now if we digitalize it, we can use it for next maybe months and even years and kind of save time in the future?
Yeah, you know, you ask about advantages. So
I think it's a great advantage.
Yeah, if we put this in this perspective, it is an advantage. But of course, we could also mention the fears that were, especially, I think there were concerned voices, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, about for example, the fact that the recordings of the lectures will be used to actually fire people. Yeah, so there will be no need anymore for the actual lecturers if the recordings would be available and the hours would be reduced. However, we again go back to the institutional and regulatory questions, actually. So in terms of the technology itself, I think, yeah, that we'll be able to use these materials, and this would be an advantage in the long run.
I believe we can still learn more, and we already touched on the topic of the importance of relationship and being not only watching the videos but also being present. Florian, what do you think are the advantages of online learning? You mentioned the possibility of kind of that it is easier to invite someone. What is, in your experience, the advantage, something maybe you'd like to keep?
Well, I think the entire Corona crisis has been catalytic in a way for a couple of factors, and there I totally agree with Joanna. First of all, it's acceptance of digitally based teaching that has increased a lot in Germany at any rate. Investment has increased a lot into infrastructure, into programs that I see as a real advantage on a global level, as it were. Conceptual change, curricular change, now that online-based teaching invades or is seen as a value for tertiary education, and also the practicalities that have been solved. And I suppose you can see a lot of advantages, but they can all be put down to these four different factors in a way. So I'm quite optimistic. I also have heard this point that Joanna mentioned a minute or two ago, that there might be the danger of material being recorded and then people laid off or people fired, as you said. But I don't see this on the horizon at the moment in our system, but I see more the synergies of having technological curricular invention and opening and broadening the horizon for participation of people that can't be at the university physically, for example, at any given moment. So I see a real advantage in having these hybrid scenarios too. Enabling people to participate, but not sort of forcing them into a structure that is given in a certain building, for example.
So if I understand correctly, also the kind of technical advancement is a very important advantage. I think, Maciej, this is a place for you to tell us a bit more about, are there any technical advancements? What are we working on now? Are there any new developments? And there is also a question from Hannah. She asked, beside video conferences, what kind of tools do you use for asynchronous learning scenarios? And what are possible advantages over online classes? So I hope for you to kind of combine my two questions of what are the new advancements, what are we working on now, and then answer Hannah's question as well.
Okay, so I'll try to answer these two. I mean, for quite a long time, there were many inventions, let's call them that way, that touched education, but they were not really necessary at that point. I mean, before pandemic, we didn't really need any specialized applications or individualized content for students because there was no real need, I mean, no real pressure for this to be used. But when it turned out that we cannot be at the university, we cannot meet to learn together, many of those ideas were, like, from one day to the other, surprisingly useful or surprisingly necessary at the university. and also at schools, I'd say. And the question that Hannah asked is about asynchronous learning, and I think that's the point that we didn't touch really much so far. I mean, we were discussing video conferencing and online collaboration tools like Miro, but quite big part of this education could be done asynchronously in the sense that the teacher does not really need to be present at the time when the students work or the students learn. And at the very, very beginning of the pandemic, most of the universities somehow tried to use, I mean, Polish universities, that's from where I take those information, use classical tools that were used before at companies and corporations like Teams, like Slack, like Google Groups, and this kind of places you can gather people that together perform some tasks. And actually, from my perspective and from my experience, it worked quite well in the sense that it allowed the students to be engaged in many, many more ways than they used to be engaged before. So before pandemic, let's say, I'm a physicist myself, so I can tell from that kind of experience. When we were trying to solve some exercises, work on some problems, we usually met together by Blackboard, and it wasn't really that engaging and that exciting, let's say. But when we have all those tools, when we can use Slack or have a short video call and discuss all these problems, we don't need to really spend so much time to be together. I mean, use so much time to gather in one place, but still can be present, still can be collaborating together. So asynchronous learning in the sense that without a teacher, I think it's something we could take from the pandemic and to move forward, because it is the easiest way from my perspective in this scenario to teach the students to work in groups. I mean, we can split them in groups in Zoom breakout rooms, but it's not really the same. The dynamic of the group that's left somewhere alone is quite different to the situation when the teacher is still there waiting for them to come back, I think.
I would like to follow with a question. Do you know of any solutions being prepared now that we could use for this asynchronous learning, or even something new that is coming up for online learning? Do we have any technological new things you don't think we know of about for now?
Well, there are many tools that are not really used up to now, but they were still there. There's the Google Suite that could be used. There's Microsoft tools. And I think that you're somehow closing me on the Predict that I'm working in. But that's a bit different thing, I say. I mean, what we're working in Predict is providing very individualized content and individualized experience to learning. It's something quite different to what we do at the universities, but I think that universities could use it. I mean, not exactly our solution, but this approach to somehow individualize the content and the way of providing the content to the students. Because it turns out, I think that Joanna would agree with me that it's visible in the research that at this point, even, I mean, yet again, with a magnifying glass, we see differences between students, that they use the content in different ways, that they have different rates of learning, that they want to provide the same experience, learning experience.
Maciej, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think, I don't know how about others, but I stopped hearing you correctly.
Okay.
Yes, me? Is it okay for me?
Can you hear Maciej?
Okay. No.
Okay, so I would like to ask István for your input, and when Maciej's connection will be more stable, we will come back to it. Is that okay?
Yes, of course, for me at least. So yes, asynchronous contents are really important. I think what the traditional higher education hasn't really exploited or explored to what extent students can self-directed learning and progress by their individual or group work. These have very well elaborated teaching technology called project-based learning or problem-based learning or research-based learning. And the essence or the focus of these methodologies is to assign students well-defined tasks with many open parameters or features. It's not the same for natural sciences or social sciences or humanities or art, but the students can feel very inspired and can develop their autonomous learning skills and learn responsibility for their own learning, and they are extremely good at that. There are two different options for this. One is when they absolutely independently organize how they manage the assignment. One of my students group regularly met at Sunday, 8 o'clock in the morning to progress with the assignments, because that was a definitely free time for each member of the group. But there is another interesting option when the teacher invites students to take part in the design process of the learning. And it's again something that we didn't automatically assume that students can have valuable contribution to the design of a learning process, but they definitely have very good ideas. For example, sometimes they can offer technologies because their own experimentation often helps to discover new things. And the final thing that I wanted to add, the asynchronous challenge, that the internet is full with open online courses that can have much greater contribution to the classes or the courses compared to the present situation. So how we live with this excellent opportunity. So the computer is already part of the learning, even in the face-to-face learning environment. Computer will be there. I often bagged that my students should have their laptop on in front of them. In online teaching and learning environment, it's definitely given. The computer is there. So it's so easy to ask that, please look up in the internet, what is the definition of this? What kind of picture, what kind of figure can support this issue? And they immediately can bring into the class many great resources, and we can also practice the critical use of the media content in the same time.
Thank you. Waking up at 8 a.m., meeting at 8 a.m. on Sunday shows very high commitment. Maciej, I see your internet connection is a bit more stable now. Would you like to finish?
Well, I'm not sure when our connection broke, but to sum up, I would say that what we need to solve and what asynchronous learning would probably help to solve is the accessibility issues that we have. I mean, I'm having problems with my connections today during our talk, and that's probably what happens to most of the students. So if we rely heavily on video conferencing, some of the students will be probably left behind. I mean, I'm a bit left behind today because I'm having problems with my connection. So I think that we should complement the video conferencing with not necessarily just PDFs of the materials that we're having in school or university, but more elaborate platforms, more elaborate tools that could be used and to be used during the education process. Maybe not that resource consuming as video conferencing.
Okay, so I feel like you all agree that it is very important and very useful to kind of support one tool with another and to offer kind of the video conferencing as a substitute for meeting in person, but also providing a very specific learning tools, maybe Miro, maybe Moral, maybe something new that can help kind of guide the process to support so they're compatible. Florian, I see you nodding, I think. This is my cue to call you out, isn't it?
Aggressive nodding. Well, no, I would just like to take up 2 points that István mentioned, because I also think that asynchronous learning and the use of platforms is still something like a blind spot, maybe, that can be fostered technologically and curricular. And the 2 points are taking students aboard with their competences they already have, and they are different ones than the one we have probably. So taking them on board technically and conceptually. And the other thing is making use of specific resources that are available only online and that hadn't been used before in the classroom because of technicalities, again, too, and practicalities. And also on top, then asking yourself, is that resource a good resource we can use? Because there are plenty, as István mentioned, plenty of resources online available, and not all are maybe desirable to have in your learning process. So there needs to be some sort of meta reflection on these issues too, I think, and that's only possible if you combine these two scenarios. So these two questions, taking students on board and making use of specific resources.
This is very interesting. I would actually like Joanna to maybe compare it to the research you've conducted. Is there anything about engaging students and how to engage them in the process of creating the teaching process, if that makes sense?
Sorry, I also have poor connection, but I managed, I hope, to hear you. So I think this is a great idea to engage students in learning process, and this can be done, in the beginning of classes, discussing both the tools which they, prefer and even the material that they would like to focus on, and then, for example, to somehow adjust the content you're producing to their needs. And I think that actually what is the most important part of this, and what somehow strikes me in what we've been talking about, is that also because we multiply various tools and various methods and various channels in which we can teach. But I think that the problem that students often experience is actually that each professor does it. So they have then 20 various communication channels, 20 various applications that they have to use, each classes with various types of messaging and various places in which the information about what they should prepare on the next classes are. And I think that this is quite important, that not only the students can be involved in the process of designing the technological side of the teaching process, but also that they should be consulted in terms of the tools that we are using in our contact with them. So yeah, and actually I had the pleasure, let's call it, of experiencing this shift both from the students' perspective, because I had my last semester of PhD classes that I had to attend past semester, and I also teach, so I had both of these perspectives. And literally the 4 lectures that I had as a PhD student, each of them was on different platform, and I was like, okay, so now Discord, so now Teams, so now Meet, so now Zoom. Okay, I will at least know them all in the first semester of online studying. So yeah, I think that not only the involvement of students, but also some kind of sensitivity in terms of their needs and their preferences, because I believe that we are able to somehow figure out a way to actually at one faculty to use more or less similar tools, not only for video conferencing, but also for other channels of communication with students.
Thank you. So I'm gonna conduct a small research here, something I've learned today from István. I hope you'll all allow me. So to build the connection with people who are listening to us, could you all please comment in the comment section, would you be like to involved in the process of designing your lectures, your classes? And if you would like to be involved, what platforms would you recommend for your teachers to use? We've mentioned a lot of them. We talked about a variety of them and how they vary in our experience from teacher to teacher. So, dear listeners, everybody who's watching, please comment, would you like to be involved? And if yes, which platforms should the teachers use? And as this was something I've learned from István, I think it's only fair to give you the voice now and ask you about the future of education. This was the topic of our debate. So what do you think is actually the future of education? We touched on the engagement, on feedback. We discussed how important different tools are. In your opinion, what should we expect in the future?
And that's a tough one.
Yes, that's a tough one. István, what do you think could we expect in the future of education? I think you're muted.
I think it's unpredictable, but definitely we cannot go back to the situation of last year mid-March. The education system and higher education especially have faced the challenge of renewal for decades. And I think this kind of disruptive innovation that was provoked by the pandemic situation resulted in a brand new situation when we still preserved some of our traditional approaches, the techniques, but we collected a lot of new solutions. And it's an open question, and it will be individually differ very much to what extent we can recombine the previous knowledge, the prior knowledge that we have gained during the different periods, and I think it will be less boring than before, and that's a good and promising forecast from my side.
Okay, I would like to ask to forecast the future, all of you. So, Maciej, what is your forecast for the future of education?
Well, that's a tough question because I'm not really sure if we're talking about university only or schools only, or like.
Let's talk about the universities, and I will also say that someone asked you to tell a bit more about Predict. So this is your place to also maybe talk a bit about this.
All right. So what I see in future from my university experience, and also what we do in Predict and what we see in our competition, it's nice synergy of what we know with things that we don't know yet. I mean, we'll probably, after this pandemic ends, hopefully, we'll go back to some of those traditional learning that we know, but we'll complement it with many new technologies that we've learned. So probably we will stick to this asynchronous part like Slack or Teams that with students can discuss their projects, they can work on them, they can share some work that they do. Regardless whether it's during the lecture or the classes or not. But also we strongly believe, I mean, we in Predict, that there are many things that we could automate or personalize as far as education is concerned. I mean, there is quite a bit of time that students spend learning, revising, repeating the material they need to learn. That's probably something that's not very that's the asynchronous part, right? You don't need a teacher to go through the material that you need to remember, understand, unless you need to ask a question. So there probably will be many tools emerging that will help students work on their own without teachers from some time. Because if the online education takes, let's say, more time to prepare than the regular ones, probably the students will be somehow pushed to be more, how we call it? They should to work on their own mostly, and for some of the time, and maybe not only on their own in one person, but in teams or groups. So we believe that making this education process more personal and more tailored to the needs of this particular student, without treating the students as a homogeneous group, will be something that we will see in future. Yeah.
Thank you for your forecast. Florian, what would you say is the future of education?
Well, I agree with István. It's partly unpredictable, but we've seen these changes now in acceptance, in investment, in the practicalities, in conceptual curricular changes. And I guess the clock shouldn't be turned back in a way, but I also consider it to be very important to remain critical. And by critical, I don't mean that we have to moan about all that, but constructively engaged in a critical mode, as it were, to see in how far the new settings that have evolved are useful for individuals. And I come back to the faculty point. For some faculties, like the natural sciences, there might be a completely different tableau of using these techniques than for humanities or in the area of medicine. And in that respect, I suppose one needs to be critical to think from subject cultures, if you want to call it this way. And therefore, well, my personal forecast for our area like German language and literature teacher education is that there's much to be gained, and that we'll keep on sort of exploring this path. And I think this idea of exploring trial and error partly and experimenting is a good idea for the approach for the next months before we consolidate, as it were.
Thank you. This was very interesting. Joanna, what is your idea? What do you think the future will bring for education?
So firstly, I think I'm also quite skeptical about forecasting and learning from the experience of last year, especially. But I'm also quite hopeful, and especially I somehow believe that what Maciej said about the possible solutions concerning the personalization and actually you said things that I would like that would be true in quite a short time, both from the perspective of students and tools which would allow them to easily focus on the content which is the most difficult, for example, and from the perspective of teachers, as I mentioned in the presentation, to save time for actually the things that need the interpersonal contact. So this would be perfect. I hope you're working on it, and the effects will be delivered soon. So yeah, and also I hope that we'll be able to somehow remember the possibilities of these international contacts, which don't involve, traveling as far as they used to do. So I hope we'll still, in a couple of years when all this is gone, all the pandemic is gone, I hope we'll still remember that Zoom exists for these special occasions when you want to invite somebody for a particular event. So.
Thank you. You take a wise step and tried to forecast the future. So now I have a last question. And it is a question for all of you, because tomorrow morning, the participants of Eduhack 2021 start working on their projects. And I want to ask you for your suggestions for the projects. To remind everyone, they will be working on monitoring the engagement of students during classes and how to engage them more. But to not make it too easy for them, I don't want you to give examples of solutions. Just in one sentence, tell me the area they should look more deeply into. What small part should they take into consideration more? Please, no perfect solutions, because we want them to be as creative as possible. Maciej, would you like to start? What is, in your opinion, the little part that should be taken into consideration?
I'm not sure if I squeeze it into one sentence, but I think that very important part of online education process or remote education process are actually the distractions that the students experience during trying to attend all those classes or lectures. That's one thing. And the other is that what the research shows probably is that the time of attendance, I mean, the time of the day, is not most of the cases optimal for the students. When we meet at 8 o'clock in the morning and finish the classes by 3 p.m., it's probably not the optimal way of delivering the educational content. So maybe those two factors, I mean, the distractions independent of the student, like your family or your pets, and the factors that are totally dependent on your choice when you learn.
Okay, thank you. István, what is your idea? Where should students look for inspiration for the solution?
I think students should be partners not only of the teachers, but also for each other. So any kind of self-organized cooperation, collaborative learning can be very beneficial, sometimes can multiply the impact of the classes. And one other message rather for us, for teachers, that we shouldn't teach the laptop screen. We should keep in mind that there are humans on the other side of the digital space, and we have to take care of each other and asking questions about the overall well-being in this overdosed online environment. So that's something that after the pandemic limitations or lockdown, it won't be so important when we can mix the real life situations, face-to-face options. But now in the coming months, we still have to keep going on in this very one or monotonous way of arrangements, and the discovery process in the same time, of course.
Thank you for your input. Florian, what do you think the students should look into?
Yeah, well, maybe just a sentence or two to do with differentiation, different backgrounds. Students come from different backgrounds. How can you attend that question in a way? Different backgrounds of knowledge, different backgrounds of origin, different backgrounds of well, social backgrounds, really, in a way. How should that be taken into account when you talk about engagement?
Okay, thank you. Joanna, I wanted to ask you as the last person, because I think you've read so much and you know all the research, and I wanted to give you time to choose the one thing you think they should focus on. So what is your thing?
No, actually, the question was easy for me because you used the word monitoring, and it triggers me. So when you want to monitor something, you have to remember about data protection. So, from the technical point of view, to respect the privacy and not to provide any other technological giant with information on monitoring students' behavior and their ability to focus. And I think I managed to do it in quite long, but still one sentence.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. This was very important. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for this debate. I believe there is so much more we could talk about, but unfortunately, we're running out of time. It was very educational for me personally as well. I learned to ask questions and to engage people who are listening to me more. Thank you all for that. I'm very grateful you've been with me. I was joined by István Vilmos, vice-rector for international relations at Budapest Metropolitan University. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
I was joined also by Florian Radvan, professor of German didactics and language and literature at the University of Bonn. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
We were also joined by Joanna Mazur, analyst in Digital Economy Laboratory of University of Warsaw. Thank you, Anna.
Thanks.
And we were joined by Maciej Ciemny, Scientific Affairs Director at Predict Systems. Thank you, Maciej, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, before we say goodbye today, I would like to just remind you that as this discussion comes to an end, the participants of Eduhack 2021 begin their journey. For the next 3 days will be very intense for them. So let's all wish them good luck for the upcoming event. And again, thank you all for listening to our debate. Thank you to the experts for joining me. I hope you all feel inspired and hopeful about the future. And if you want to know more, the topic and the report, want to know more about the topic, the report presented by Joanna is available at our site, eduhack2021.eu. Once again, thank you all for joining us and have a good evening.